Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Samachet. Happy Tu B'Shvat to everybody. And we have a lot of sponsorships. Today's daf is sponsored by Dr. David and Mitzi Geffen in memory of Rabbanit Sarah Henna Rabinowitz Geffen on her 60th year at site. From 1910 to 1970, her husband, Rav Tuvia Geffen, was the rabbi of Shiur Israel Synagogue in Atlanta, where she served the community with great dedication and brought up their 8 children in a life of love and learning. 6 of her 18 grandchildren made Aliyah to Israel, and her life and memory is an inspiration to the generations, her descendants in the U.S. and Israel. And also by Jessica Jabanik in honor of her mother, Margaret Hadaway. She is completing radiation treatment for breast cancer today. I hope for a continued refuah shlema. And by Liora Kukin in honor of Tu B'Shvat and in celebration of Jonathan and her 39th wedding anniversary. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. We ended yesterday. We're going to start off a little bit dry with this issue of, again, being stuck outside the machanot. From there, I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to see today. We're going to get to Tchiyat HaMetim, resurrection of the dead, and Olam Haba, and what's going to be in the future. Then we're going to get to issues of how we celebrate Yom Tov. Famous machloket, is it Chetzio Lachem, Chetzio Lashem? Do we do half day for God, half day for us, meaning learn half day and eat half day? Or, obviously don't eat the whole half day, or is it, can you do kulo lashem or kulo lachem? So very interesting things that come up in today's daf, and a lot of things that, maybe not a lot, but a few things that you've probably heard of and come across before. Okay, so again, like I said, we'll start in the beginning with our Zav and the Baal Keri, and someone who has a seminal mission that we're going to treat him like a Zav we saw yesterday. First we saw a Braita that said Zav v'chol Zav. Remember the drasha was Chol Zav includes, because it says all Zav, it includes. We have the 3 machanot. Let's just review quickly. Mitzora has to be out of all 3, right? Both the Machaneh Shechina, where the Mishkan was, the Machaneh Leviyah, where the Leviim lived, and then also the Machaneh Israel, where everybody else lives. The Mitzora, leper, has to be out of all those. Then we have the Zav, which we said includes someone with a seminal mission, a Baal Keri, has to be out of the 2 inner ones, the Shechina and the Leviyah, and someone who's Tamei Meit, and anyone who's Tamei anything, like a sheret's got to touch them, that person can't be in the Mikdash, but he can be everywhere else. So we saw that the Baal Keri is like the Zav, and then we said this supports Rabbi Yochanan, who also said that that's the case. And then we brought a Braita, not a Braita, sorry, it's a Mishnah in Zavim. The Mishnah, that was a Meitiveh. Now, there was something strange about this Meitiveh. I just want to point out, Meitiveh is a word that basically means we're going to start some sort of Tanaitic source, could be a Mishnah, a Braita, Tosefta, and then we're going to use it to contradict an Amora, because an Amora can't contradict a Braita, so we're going to say, hey, there's a problem with what you're saying. It doesn't match with this Tanaitic source, okay? Now, the problem with this is that the Meitiveh is really on not only Rabbi Yochanan, that would make sense if the Meitiveh was on Rabbi Yochanan, but it's even on the Tanaitic source itself. Now, normally when you have one Tanaitic source that contradicts another one, the word the Gemara uses is uraminhu. There's a contradiction between 2 equal sources. So something doesn't really jive here, because you could say it's questioning Rabbi Yochanan, but if it's questioning Rabbi Yochanan, it's really questioning the Braita, okay? And the wording then doesn't really match so well. So I'm just raising it as an issue and also using it as an opportunity to teach you different terminology and what that terminology means. And sometimes once in a while, it's used a little bit differently, but here's a good case of an exception, or maybe it was brought as a question against Rabbi Yochanan, even though really it contradicts with the Braita. It could be, by the way, a possible suggestion is the sugya was the sugya of Rabbi Yochanan, and they brought these contradictory sources on Rabbi Yochanan, and maybe when this sugya was learned, they didn't know about the Braita, right? Maybe they didn't know that Braita existed that says Zav v'chol Zav l'rabot Baal Keri. Seems a little bit weird because it seems so basic in our sugya, but maybe the people in that Beit Midrash didn't know about it. And maybe that's why they're just quoting the sugya. It started with this Braita, but really the sugya as it happened in the Beit Midrash didn't have the Braita in it at all. In any case, we brought this Mishnah, Baal Keri Kimagash Sheretz, which we said sounds like it must be talking about Limachanotam, meaning it's treated like a Tamei Meit, which is only outside of one Machaneh. And that would contradict what Rabbi Yochanan said or what the Braita said. To which we answered, no, it could be saying l'tumatam, and we concluded with, just like magash sheretz, touching a sheretz, cap will make you tamei, even if it's ba'ones. It wasn't intentional, you didn't try to, it just fell upon you. Likewise, Baal Keri metame ba'ones. Okay, and that's how we explain the Mishnah in Zavim. However, the Gemara is going to say that doesn't make sense if you continue on in the Mishnah in Zavim. Look at the next section. Meitive, it says, Bo'el nida kitmei meit. A person who sleeps with a woman who's a nida becomes tameh like a tameh meit. Okay, now, if we just said the topic is tuma and not machanot, then we're going to have to explain this part also as tuma. So let's try. Limai. In what way is a bo'el nida like a tameh meit? So, ilema litumatam, if you want to say, oh, well, a bo'el nida becomes, by the way, this is true. The status of a bo'el nida is that they become tameh for 7 days, just like the nida, when a woman who's menstruating is tameh for 7 days. Likewise, someone who sleeps with her is also going to be tameh for 7 days. So, if you want to say that, which then would make sense, bo'el nida kitmei meit, tameh meit is also impure for 7 days. They both say it in the Torah explicitly. So again, you don't need a Mishnah to tell you something. This is the exact question we had last time on the previous source, the earlier part of the Mishnah. It doesn't, the Mishnah doesn't tell you something that's said explicitly in the Torah. We know that. It's an obvious, right? And maybe they would tell you a halacha that says in the Torah, but they wouldn't say, oh, by the way, a bo'el nida is like a tameh meit, that they're both 7 days if it says 7 days in the Torah. So therefore, that's not possible. So therefore, we have to go back to elalav lemachanotam. It must be that a bo'el nida can't go into machaneh shechina just like a tameh meit. And then when we desefa lemachanotam have reishanami lemachanotam, if the latter part of that Mishnah is talking about this is similar to that in how many camps they have to be excluded from. Likewise, we're going to say the same thing for the earlier part of the Mishnah, and then we're back to square one that we said bal keri kimaga sheretz, meaning it would be like a tameh sheretz, which only has to leave one camp. So now we're stuck back with our original question from yesterday. So the Gemara says, no, midi iria hakadita v'hakadita. No, you can easily say this one is talking in one way, and that one's talking in another way, meaning one comparison is for the issue of machanot, and one comparison is for the issue of tuma, and therefore we can still explain the earlier one the way we wanted to, and it doesn't matter. They don't have to match up entirely. It doesn't have to mean just because the topic of the similarity was that way in the second part, it also has to be that way in the first part. Second question on Rabbi Yochanan, or like I said, really on the Braita. Meitive. Mitzorah chamor mizav. V'zav chamor mitmei meit. Okay, so far so good. This is what we've been talking about. Mitzorah is the most stringent. Underneath that, the zav. Underneath that, the tmei meit. Okay, so far that fits. Yatsa ba'al keri shemitamei meit chamor mimenu. It's very strange wording in general. We'll explain in a minute how they explain this to mean, but right now it sounds like ba'al keri is out of all this. Okay, shetamei meit chamor mimenu. In other words, tamei meit is more stringent than a ba'al keri. It makes sense to say tamei meit is more stringent than a ba'al keri, but it doesn't make sense if it's more stringent than if we're assuming this is talking about how many camps each one needs to be excluded from. Well, then it sounds like a ba'al keri is going to be like a tamei meit because it's less stringent than that. So obviously, if it's going to be out of any camp, it'll be out of only one, and it won't be like the zav, like we said. So ma yatsa. So again, Gemara is going to explain it in one way and basically say this creates a contradiction. Lav yatsa michlal zav uba lechlal tamei meit. Does it not mean that it left? What does it mean? Yatsa. Yatsa from where? Yatsa means it's excluded from. Oh, it's excluded from zav. You might have thought it would be like a zav, but no, it's excluded from zav. Why? It's not in the same category as zav because it's more lenient than tamei meit, which would make sense, by the way, that it's more lenient because the ba'al keri is only tamei for 1 day. Tamei meit is tamei for 7 days. It needs sprinkling process. It's a whole different thing. And then what's it telling you basically? That it doesn't have to be separate outside of 2 camps. He only needs to leave 1 camp, the machaneh shechina, like the tamei meit. And then that would contradict what Rabbi Yochanan said, that he has to be out of 2 machanot. And like I said, also what the original Braita said, that the ba'al keri is treated like a zav. So they say, lo, we're going to explain this differently. What does it mean? It means he left tamei meit. Even though you would have thought he's more lenient than tamei meit, he actually leaves. Okay, now we're reading this not the way it says. Yatsa ba'al keri shetamei meit chamor mimenu. Now the whole question is, where did he leave from? Oh, he left from the tamei meit, and now it's more like even though tamei meit is chamor mimenu. right? Va'af al gav, even though tmei met is chamor mimenu. Now, it's better if you read this not dimutar, but umutar. A lot of people change the nusach. And it's mutar b'machaneh leviyah. In other words, tmei met is chamor, and it's permitted, even though tmei met is more stringent, it's actually permitted in the machaneh leviyah. But despite that, despite the fact that it's more lenient, we're going to put it in the category of the zav. Okay, we're going to take it out of where you might have thought it belonged and put it into the category of the zav. Why? Because we want to put it next to whatever it's similar to. Okay, now why is a zav like a bal keri? So first of all, you could say both are emissions that come from a man's body. That's, a secretion that comes out. That's very likely. But even more so, and this is something we saw the other day, that it's a tuma migufo. It comes from within someone's body, as opposed to tmei met, which is something external, right? I come in contact with something else, and that creates impurity. So also in that way, it's more similar to a zav, and therefore it goes into the category of zav. Okay, so we've resolved all the contradictions against Rabbi Yochanan. Now we can move on. Tane, we're not totally moving on yet. Soon we'll move on entirely from this topic, but we're still here. Tane kamei Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. So one of the people who teach Breitot, remember there were people who memorized Breitot, they came and brought a Breita in front of Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, right? We're no longer in the Tannaitic time period. We're later Amoraim, who would memorize all these Breitot, and then they would bring them to the Beit Midrash. So he brings the following Breita, and he darshans this pasuk, which you'll see is a very strange verse. Okay, it's talking about when someone becomes a Baal Keri. Okay, it's in Dvarim Kaf Gimel Yud Aleph. If you have a person, asher a man, asher lo yiyeh tahor mikre laila, he won't be impure because something happens to him at night. Okay, basically that means seminal emission. V'yatsa michutz lamachaneh lo yavo al toch hamachaneh, and he leaves the camp. He has to leave where he is. Lo yavo el toch hamachaneh. He can't go into the camp. So this is a little bit strange. It says the same thing kind of twice. He has to leave the camp. He can't go into the camp. And why is he going into the camp if he left the camp, right? There's something very weird going on, and that's why we're going to darshan this. So the Breita he brings says the first part of that verse, and he leaves the machaneh, is referring to he leaves the machaneh shchina. In other words, where are we assuming this person is? He's in the temple. He all of a sudden sees he has this emission. He starts to leave. Now, where do you get when you leave? Right? You're facing, okay, remember how the camp was. There was a square in the middle of the Mishkan. Around that, a square of the Machaneh Leviyah, and around that, a square of Machaneh Yisrael. So then, lo yavo al toch hamachaneh zo Machaneh Leviyah. Okay? Don't go into the Machaneh. That's the Machaneh Leviyah. You're basically facing now the Machaneh Leviyah. So Becky, you're saying you go through the tunnels. Yeah, we're not talking about how you got out, really. Okay, that's not what they're discussing right now. Also, there's a difference. This pasuk is talking about in the time of the Mishkan. There were no tunnels, right? That's in the time where there's a temple. Anyway, the idea is basically he leaves the Machaneh Shechina, and it says don't go into the Machaneh Leviyah. So Mikal the Baal Keri sheyatzeh chutz l'shtei machanot. Again, here we have a source that a Baal Keri has to leave two machanot. They prove it from this verse, right? So what we tried to say in the Breita, Rabbi Yochanan said, here we have a pasuk to prove it, because you see, you have to leave two machanot. So now Amrle. So when he brought this in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, he questions his Breita. He says, now this I'm going to tell you right now. There's two versions of how to read this. It's very complicated to understand exactly what they mean. You can only really understand a little bit of where they're getting at when you get to the answer, but I'll try to explain it away. It's very, very hard words to understand and what the question really means. Akati lo yalte afikde. Something about this is weird. You start off in Machaneh Shechina, and it tells you, the pasuk says, v'yatsa michutz lamachaneh, right? Leave the Machaneh. Then akati lo yalte, you haven't even gone in yet to the Machaneh Leviyah, and then it tells you afikte, go out of it, right? Lo yavo el. Don't come into. It's almost like you haven't even gotten there and they're telling you to go out of there. It's a little bit weird because you are really standing in front of there. So that's why the question is a little bit strange. Or lishnachrina, akate lo afikte ialte. You haven't even left there yet and you're already talking about going into it, like going into the Machaneh Leviyah. And whatever they're saying, they're basically saying this pasuk would be weird. That, and you'll see this from the answer. They find it weird that you're standing in Machaneh Shechina and going out. I think part of the problem also is that how else are you going to get through Machaneh Leviyah if you can't even go into it? Even though it doesn't sound like that's what they're asking, but that's also another problem, right? You have to go through the Machaneh Leviyah to get to where you're going. So something's bothering them about this. Again, it's very hard to pin exactly what this is. So therefore they say, Ela ema michutz lamachane zo machane leviyah, lo yavo toch hamachane zo machane shechina. What they're saying is, you must be standing not in machane shechina. The person must be standing in machane leviyah. And what they say is, right, start again the pasuk, yatzal michutz lamachane, go out. And now, before you go out, they tell you, lo yavo el toch hamachane. Don't go toward the inside where the machane shechina is, right? Don't turn whatever direction. It depends where you are. Don't turn right, turn left, right? It's telling you which way to go when you leave. And that's why I think the question, now you can look at the question a little better, right? It's telling you, don't, right? It says, leave the machane. I think what they're saying is also, you're getting commanded the whole thing right now when you're not even, you're standing, maybe what they're saying actually now all of a sudden dawned on me, you're standing in the machane shechina and they're telling you two things, like leave and don't go, but you haven't even gone yet, but they're already telling you this. So in this one, it makes a lot of sense. Before you start to leave the machane, we're going to tell you which direction to go in. Go toward machane Yisrael, don't go toward machane shechina. The obvious problem with this explanation is, why would you even think that you could go toward machane shechina? Everybody knows that the level of sanctity is higher there. So it almost like it's not so necessary to say that. But anyway, that's how they explain this drasha in the end. Matkifla Ravina. Ravina says, so what they basically did is they switched the order. Then instead of saying the first one was machane shechina and the second was machane leviyah, they switched the order and say, no, first they mean machane leviyah and then they mean machane shechina. And the main difference is, where's the person standing? Are they standing in the shechina and they have to leave, or where the mishkan is, or are they standing in the machane leviyah and they have to leave and they're just being told which way to go? But Ravina questions this and says, maybe both parts of the verse are talking about the same place. Don't, right, leave the machane, don't go in the machane, right? Maybe means it's, you don't have to leave two machanot. We're back to, right, our question against Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe it means, and against the Braita, maybe it means you only have to leave one camp. And it's just telling you that there's an aseh and a lo taseh. This is noting that, look at the wording. The wording is different. Yatzal michutz lamachane is a positive commandment, go out. V'lo yavo toch hamachane is a negative commandment. So maybe we have this very often where you end up with a positive and a negative about the same thing, right? Like for example, there's a, don't, if you find something on the floor, right? Or you find something on the street, you have to return it, right? Lo tuchal litalem, you can't ignore it, right? You can't not return it. So there's a positive and a negative. So maybe it's the same thing here. And that always makes something stronger. When there's two things, there's also a positive and also a negative, that makes it stronger. So maybe that's what it is. They say no, because if that's what they wanted to say, it could have just ended before the word hamachane. Okay, it could have said, go out of this camp and don't go back in, or don't go in. In would have been obvious, you mean the same thing. So therefore, ha-machane lamali. Why does it say machane in the end? It says machane twice in the verse. So obviously we're going to say, why does it say machane twice? Shma mina litain lo machana acheret. It's to tell you there's two machanot that we're discussing here. That's the end of this whole section that we got off on a tangent about this pasuk about the Metzora. And now we're back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah was discussing a list of things that do override Shabbat or don't override Shabbat when it comes to the korban, the sacrifices. So it said in the list of, we started with the list of things that do override Shabbat. So one of them is michoy chavav, cleaning out the excrement of the animal from the insides. So my michoy chavav, what is this exactly? Rav Huna amar sheminakvam b'sakin. You take a knife and you cut them out, basically. You cut them out from inside the animal. It's the liquid secretions that are inside that you use the sharpness of the knife and you kind of push them out. Okay, you kind of scrape them, as opposed to scraping out, something hard in there. You're taking out these liquid secretions that are inside. Amar Rabbi Elazar, my time of Dechia Barav. What's his reason? Dichtiv v'charvot, and that's how do we know that michoy means this? Because it says v'charvot mechim garim yochelu. This is a verse in Yeshayahu, which is going to get us off on our big tangent about the resurrection of the dead and the world to come. It says in Yeshayahu, in the future, what will happen? The swords of Mechim, Garim Yochelu. Okay, so what does this mean exactly? My mashma, how do you get it from here? So, Kidimitargem Rav Yosef, V'nichsehem dereshiaya tzadikaya yechasnun. As Rav Yosef translates there, the nichasim, the possessions of the rishaim, okay, charvot are the possessions, mechim are rishaim. This is where we get that we're getting rid of the bad stuff that's inside, okay? So that's where we get that mechim is bad stuff. They get it from that. And what's going to happen? The nichsehem of the rishaim, the possessions of the evil people, tzadikai yichsanum. They will be inherited by the tzadikim, by the righteous. So now that they mention this verse, they want to understand the whole verse. So the beginning of the verse says, "V'ra'u kvasim kidabram." Okay, the sheep will graze like it was said. Okay, here they mean sheep grazing. This is a very positive nivuah, something that's going to be in the future. It's a reference to something. We don't know what it is. And kidavram means as it was said where? And that's going to be the big question. So Amar Menashe bar Yomi Amarav, Kim midubar bam. As it was said to them, right? That's what it means, kidavram, as they spoke, meaning as it was spoken to them. Okay, so somewhere it was spoken to them, something. That's what's going to happen in the world to come that they're referring to. So, my kim midubar bam. What is this? Amar Abaye v'charvot mechim gavim yochelu. Oh, the second part of the pasuk. And let's read it as a colon, right? So it says, Ra'u kvasim kidavram, as it was said, colon, v'charvot mechim, right? The swords of the right, and the possessions of the evil people will be inherited by the righteous. And that's what it's describing. That's the Ra'u Kvasim. That's what's going to be in the world to come. So now, Amar le Rava, I don't like your explanation about it. Bishlama iktiv charvot kid kamarta. If it said, right, it would be colon, the swords of. Then it would make sense. However, what does it say? Hasha dichtiv vicharvot. But it says, and the swords. So what are the swords? Or I guess, right, it could be interesting. Julie, you're pointing out that it's ruins. Maybe I'm translating it wrong, right? I was thinking swords, like those are their possessions, but maybe you're saying the charvot, the things that are destroyed from them and the things that were taken away from them. So charvot, so now that it says vicharvot and the charvot, which means, it means ra'u kvasim kidavram, that's one thing. And this will also happen. It's describing two different things. So because of that vav, that one little letter, changes the whole meaning of the verse. So he says, I don't think you're right. So therefore he says, right, milta acharita kamar. I think because of the end, it's saying this is something else. In addition to the ra'u kvasim kidavram, which means something else, which we're going to explain right now, and the charvot rishaim, etc. So El Amarav, how does he explain the beginning part of the verse? What's kidavram? Kid Rav Hanan al Amarav, the Amar Rav Hanan al Amarav, as Rav Hanan said in the name of Rav, what did he say? Atidim tzadikim shechayu et hametim. Okay, in the future there will be tchiyat hametim. Okay, the tzadikim. Just want to see one thing. The tzadikim will be mechayeh the metim. Right, there's going to be resurrection of the dead. I just want to check one thing here. Tzadikim. Something I was noting. Right. I guess that there will be tzaddikim that will resurrect the dead. Okay. Where have we seen such a thing happen? Okay. Where's this kidavram? What does it mean kidavram? Okay. So it makes a lot of sense if you're saying this happens in the same verse, right? In the same verse, it says, as we said, and then it goes on. But now he's going to say, as we said, somewhere else entirely. Okay. That there will be this time where tzaddikim will resurrect the dead. So now what does it say? Where do we get this from? Ktiv hacha. V'ra'u kvasim kidavram, u'ktiv hatam yir'u basham v'gil'ad kimei olam. Okay, we're jumping to a different book entirely. We were in Yeshayahu, chapter 5. Now we're jumping to Micha, chapter 7. Okay, in chapter 7 it says, now what's the similarity? Yir'u, we have this issue of animals grazing. Yir'u bashan v'gil'ad kimei olam. It's also describing something in the future. So what's bashan? Bashan is a reference to Elisha. Haba min Bashan, because he came from Bashan. How do we know he came from Bashan? Shene'emar, v'yani v'shafat b'Bashan. Okay, there's a pasuk, it's with the genealogies in Divrei Yamim. Yani and Shafat come from Bashan. Uchtiv, po Elisha ben Shafat, asher yatzak mayim al yedei Eliyahu. Elisha was ben Shafat, so he came from Bashan. Shafat was from Bashan, he came from there. So Bashan is a reference to Elisha, and Eliyahu, right? The Gil'ad, ze Eliyahu, we all know that, Eliyahu Giladi, right? When we sing that song. So, ze Eliyahu, shenemar v'yomer Eliyahu tishbi mitoshavei Gil'ad v'gomer. So, Bashan and Gil'ad are references to Elisha and Eliyahu. Ra'u, this grazing, is a reference to that the tzaddikim, they often talk about tzaddikim as the shepherds, the tzaddikim will be able to be mechayem etim, like, right? How do we know this is tchiyat metim? Because what was unique to Elisha and Eliyahu, they both brought people back to life. Okay, so therefore, this is in the future, the people will be mechayem, the tzaddikim will be mechayem etim. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Atidim tzaddikim shechayu metim, shenemar, od yeshvu zkenim u'zkenot b'rechovot Yerushalayim. Here's another proof. Tzaddikim will be mechayem etim. V'ish meshanto biyado merov yamim. And each one has his cloak in his hand from rov yamim. Okay, so uchtiv. What is this cloak? Well, it says v'samti mishanti al pi anar. When he brought him back to life, he put his mishenet on him. So here you see the mishenet is associated with bringing back to life, and the mishenet is associated in this pasuk about the zkenim and zkenot in rechovot Yerushalayim, and ish mishanto biyado. They're going to have the power to be mechayem etim. Okay, now we're going to get off on a bunch of contradictory verses about what's going to be in the future. Okay, this is a good example of, right, the rabbis trying to figure out what's going to be in the future. We'll get back to how the Rambam views all these psukim, because the Rambam says you cannot, right, try to say what you think is going to be in the future. We have no idea. Okay, so you have to understand these Gemara. The Rambam must have taken these Gemaras a bit of a different way than they sound in a simple reading. Ula Ramiktiv. Ula brought up contradictory verses. Bila hamavet lanetzach. That means the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, will be non-existent. In other words, there won't be death anymore in the world to come. Uchtiv ki anar b'mea shana yamut. Says when somebody dies at age 100, people are going to say, "Oh, he was so young." Okay, right? That's going to be. But what do you notice? He will die. It's not like there won't be death. It's just people will die much older. So those seem to contradict. Lo kashya kam b'Yisrael kam ba'akum. Okay, the Jews will live forever. The non-Jews, the Gentiles, will die at a much later age. So here's a strange question and a not great answer for us. Ovdei kochavim mai ba'u hatam. What are they doing there in the world to come? What, there's going to be Gentiles there? Dichtiv va'amdu zarim v'ra'u tzonchem u'bnei nechar ikarchem v'kormechem. Oh, what's going to be their job? They're going to work for us. Okay, again, hard to understand in our modern eye, right? But that's what the verses say, right? They will be our farmers and they'll work in our vineyards. Next pasuk. Rav Chisti Rami, he brings up another contradiction. The moon will get much brighter, right? The moon will kind of turn into nothing, and the sun will be, kind of embarrassed. But what it really means is there's not going to be any light anymore. Their light is going to be gone. Why is that? Because the Shechina is going to provide light, so much light that you won't need the light of the sun and the moon. The light of the moon is going to be like the light of the sun. It's going to be so much brighter than it was. And the light of the sun is going to be shivatayim. Some people say that means 49 times what it is now. Okay, like the or of the 7 days. So basically, right, this is a good example of taking psukim very literally, which were probably never meant to be understood literally, right? This is describing. So one says you're not going to need the sun at all, and the other one, or the moon, and the other one says it's going to be so much brighter from the light of the sun, the light of the moon. So what's going on? So lo kashya kan lo olam haba kan yimot Mashiach. In Yimot Mashiach, right, which precedes the olam haba, Yimot Mashiach, the light will be super bright from the sun and the moon. It will be even brighter than it is now. Sounds like the ozone layer, right? Exactly, global warming. Here it's described as a good thing. We obviously view global warming as a bad thing. And the next thing it says is the Ziva Shechina, that's going to be in Olam Haba. So now they bring up the very famous line, Ula Shmuel, that's quoted by the Rambam. According to Shmuel, who says, Ein ben Olam Hazeh Yimot Mashiach ele shibu malchuyot bilvad. There's going to be nothing supernatural about the Yimot Mashiach. It's not going to be like the sun is going to be 49 times as bright as it is now. No, the only difference is that we're the ones in charge. So how can he explain this contradiction? Right? That's very famous of the Rambam. He says, don't think something supernatural is going to happen. It's just going to be, right, a changing of events that's going to put us in a different place in the world, but not that anything major is going to be different. So, or supernatural. So he says, both are talking about the world to come, because Yimot Mashiach is going to be the same. They're both talking about the world to come. It depends where you're going to be. If you're going to be where the Shekhinah is, then it's just the Shekhinah. If you're going to be where the Tzaddikim are, then you're going to have this very bright light. It's interesting that they talk about machanot, right? Our whole discussion yesterday and today was all about the different camps. And here it's like there were camps in the Mishkan, there were different camps in the time of Bayit Sheni, and then they're saying in the future world, there's also going to be this idea of different camps. Another contradictory pasuk. Ani amit ve'achayeh. Okay, this is a pasuk from Dvarim. Okay, this is in Ha'azinu. Okay, here's the pasuk. Ru'u ata ki ani anihu ve'en Elohim imadi. And I am God. There's no one like me. Ani amit ve'achayeh. I will kill people and bring them back to life, or we'll see. Achayeh, bring people to life. We don't know what this means yet. Machatzti v'ani arpeh. I bring disease and I also cure. Okay, good pasuk for us to think about now. So it says, Ani amit ve'achayeh, and it says, Machatzti v'ani arpeh. Hashta chuyev v'chayim mirpalo koshkem. Once you say I can bring people back to life, right, or I can make people live, all the more so I can cure people. So why is it saying this? Ela amar kadosh baruch hu. Masha ani memit ani mechayeh. Kemoshe machatzti v'ani arpeh. Take the second part of the verse. Machatzti v'ani arpeh means I bring injury to people and then I heal them, right? I bring disease and then I heal them. Now, that's talking about the same person, right? You don't get healed unless you have disease. Now, you could have thought ani memitu mechayeh means I, like the cycle of life. People are born and people die, right? And I do both with different people. So therefore, it's coming to tell you, machatzti v'ani arpeh is only talking about one person. Therefore, the beginning is also talking about one person, and it's trying to teach you that there's this idea of resurrection of the dead. Okay? So, Tanu Rabbanan, here's a brighter that says exactly the same thing. Ani amit ve'achayeh. Yachol mita be'echad v'chayim be'echad. You might have thought we were talking about, I kill people, I decide when they die, and I decide when people are going to be born. Kederech sha'olam noheg, like the world goes. Talmud Lomar, therefore, it says, Machatzti v'ani arpeh. Again, this is the same thing, just in different words. Ma makal refuah be'echad, since the makah and the refuah are obviously referring to the same person. Af mita v'chayim ke'echad. Also, life and death, we're talking about the same person. And here goes a big line. Mikan tshuva l'omrim ein tchiyat hametim min haTorah. Here's your answer for those who say there's no tchiyat hametim from the Torah. Because here you have a reference in Sefer Dvarim for tchiyat hametim. Davar acher. B'tchila, a different way to understand this is b'tchila ma shani memit ani mechayeh. Ahadar ma shemachatzti ani arpeh. Right? A different way of understanding it is in the beginning, what I kill, I will bring back to life. Meaning, when I resurrect the dead, how am I going to resurrect people? The way they were in their life. So if you had some sort of disability, you come back with that disability. The hadar, and when you come back to life in the resurrection of the dead, after that, then I will cure you of whatever you had. So you're going to come back the way you were, and then I'm going to cure you. This, by the way, is a line the Rambam says, right? This is way too detail-oriented into what is going to be in the future, and we don't really understand what's going to be in the future, and we shouldn't try to explain how Tchiyat HaMetim is going to work. Right? He obviously has to explain this in a much more figurative kind of way, doesn't mean this is really what's going to be. The Rambam is very against people who think that we know, we're going to say this is how it's going to be in the future. Okay, close that section, although I think there's reference to it further on, but maybe not. Anyway, now we're going to move on to the other parts of the Mishnah. So we're on the last item that overrides Shabbat. Hekter chalavav. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Bo re'eh kama chaviva mitzvah b'sha'ata. This teaches you how great it is to do a mitzvah in its proper time. We've learned that the parts that have to be burned on the altar, remember, they're not one of the four main rituals that you're supposed to do with the sacrifices. Once you sprinkle the blood, you're basically done with the main parts. And the burning of the insides can actually be done at night. It's the only thing relating to sacrifices that could be done at night. So you might have thought if it's Shabbat, we should wait. But yet we don't wait. This teaches you, this is what we say, seize the opportunity. Don't push off to later what you can do now. Best to do something in its proper time, right? Usually it's so that you don't forget to take care of it. And also to show your love for mitzvot, you should do it immediately and don't push it off, right? Good lesson for mitzvot and things in general, and not procrastinating. Harkavato v'hava'ato. Okay, this is another case where they quote something, but it's not really this part that we're interested in. It's the next part, which is carrying, right? This was carrying it from outside the tchum and bringing it to the temple is not allowed. You have to do that before Shabbat. And cutting off a yabelet, a wart. If the animal has a wart, that's what we call a mum, but it's a mum, it's a blemish that will go away. So you're allowed to use the animal once you get rid of the wart. So can you take the wart off on Shabbat? So I don't know if you remember this, but in Eruvin, and we're going to quote this Mishnah very soon, it says that you can take off a wart on Shabbat. And our Mishnah says that you can't. So we're obviously going to talk about this contradiction. Uriminhu. says in the Mishnah in Eruvin, Chotchin Yabela b'mikdash avalo b'medina. You're allowed to cut off the wart in the mikdash, but not in the medina. In other words, this is forbidden by rabbinic law and ain shvut b'mikdash. We can override it. You just can't do it outside the temple, but you can do it inside the temple if you need it for a sacrifice. Ve'im b'kli, the Mishnah there says, if you do it though with your utensil, kam b'kanasur. You have to do it with your finger or something, right? You have to use your fingernail, cut it off, but you can't use an implement. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, there's two ways to explain this contradiction. Chadama, one said, Idiv biyad, ha belecha, ha b'yevesha. Both are talking about doing it by hand. One is liquidy. When it's liquidy, it's still considered part of the flesh of the animal, and it's a problem. Once it hardens, it's already just going to flake off, and therefore it's not even really considered a wart. So once it's hardened, it's basically beyond being a wart. You can take it off. It's not a problem to remove it. Right? The problem is it's a tolada, an outgrowth of gozes, of taking off the wool. So taking off something that's part of the animal would be a problem. If it's already like an external thing and it's already hardened, then it's not a problem. So therefore, they describe each one is talking about in a different circumstance. The Chanamar, the other one said, okay, we don't know who said what, but debate who said what, but one of them said, Idiv b'lecha. Both are talking about a liquidy wart, one that's still moist. V'lo kashya habiyad habikli. Our Mishnah, which forbids it, is talking about with an implement. The Mishnah there where it permitted it said by hand. Okay, now it's obvious that one said by hand because it said if you do it with an implement, it's a problem. And that's going to lead us to a question on this. So Laman Damar habiyad habikli, we're now going to ping pong back. Why did each one not agree with the other? So the one who says biyad and that one bikli, my time alo amar idividi biyad velo kasha abalecha habiyavesha. Why did he not want to say one is when it's still moist and one is when it's dried out? Amar lacha yivesha mechfach pricha. When it's dry, it just flakes off. It's nothing. It's not even, you don't even need a Mishnah to tell you that that's allowed. Okay, so you wouldn't need the Mishnah Eruvin to tell you that. It would be obvious. My time alo amar why didn't you do this distinction of hand versus implement? That would have been a good answer. So they say, Amalach, kli, why would you say that? It already, if that's the difference between the two, and our Mishnah means you did it with an implement, and that's what our Mishnah is coming to tell you that it's forbidden, but it already said that in the Mishnah Eruvin. The Mishnah Eruvin said it's forbidden if you do it with an implement. So you wouldn't need, this is classic where you don't bring in a Mishnah if it's not necessary, if you already know that halacha from somewhere else. So therefore, what we had this morning, earlier this in the class, we had about, there's a pasuk that says it, so the Mishnah is not going to tell you that. Here we have it, there's another Mishnah that tells you that, so there's no point for our Mishnah to tell you that. V'idach, what's the person then who said that that's what our Mishnah is talking about with an implement, and that's why? So how's he going to explain? That's a good question. Ha dekatani klihacha plugta de Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua atalash muinan. It brought up the kli here because he wanted to tell you the machloket Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. In other words, they wanted to get into these other things that they had this whole machloket, and they wanted to get into the details of this back and forth that they had. So they brought it up because on that there was this big machloket. So they had some other reason for bringing it, not to teach you that halacha, but to teach you this big machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, about whether or not it's allowed, right? Whether you can or can't. Remember that they get into this whole discussion, which is going to be what we're going to discuss right now. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer says all these things that are preparatory that you could have done from yesterday, we actually allow you to do. So even though it's forbidden, we wanted to bring it to show you, and you knew from the Mishnah Eruvin because we wanted to get into this whole discussion that they disagree about whether or not this is allowed. So now we're going to get into our last part of today's daf, which is Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Uma im shchita. So now, if you remember what happened in the Mishnah, they start this back and forth. And Rabbi Eliezer says, wait, shchita is deoraita, and it overrides Shabbat. So all the more so, all these derabbanans, right, should override Shabbat. So Rabbi Yeshua says to him, what do you mean? Yom Tov will prove it. Yom Tov, what happens on Yom Tov? We allow for ochal nefesh, things that are forbidden by Torah law, but we don't allow you to bring food from outside the tchum. To which Rabbi Eliezer responds, why are you talking to me from the realm of reshut, things that you just are allowed to do, but not that it's a mitzvah to do them, like eating on Yom Tov, when I'm talking about the realm of mitzvah of bringing sacrifices? So the Gemara now says, Rabbi Yeshua l'tameh. Why did Rabbi Yeshua bring the example of Yom Tov? If it's reshut, because Rabbi Yeshua doesn't think it's just an issue of reshut. If you want to eat, you can eat on Yom Tov. No, he thinks that it's a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. Now we're going to see, and Rabbi Eliezer is going to be of the opinion that it's not a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. So there's something underlying this Mishnah, some huge machloket about, do you have to eat on Yom Tov or not? So Rabbi Yeshua Latame, he goes according to, he's consistent with his approach. Tamar, Simchat Yom Tov Nami Mitzvah. Simchat Yom Tov is a mitzvah. How do we know this? Ditanya. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, and here it's funny, it's exactly the machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. It's not funny, right? It makes sense. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein lo la'adam b'Yom Tov ela o ochel v'shoteh o yoshev v'shoneh. You can either eat if you want, Simchat Yom Tov, or you can learn, okay? It doesn't matter. You can choose. You don't have to eat. You don't have to learn. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Chalkeyu. Rabbi Yoshua says it's 50, right? Split it. Chetzio la'achila u'shtia. Half the time you should be drinking and eating. Vechetzio lebeit midrash. And the other half should be for learning. Okay? Split your day. Right? I don't think he means exactly 50-50. You shouldn't spend 50% of your day eating. That would be a little much. But he means basically, right? We understand what he means. You should also eat and also be learning. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, right? Those up early, I see, Tova, you're writing, learning could be in place of eating, right? If you haven't eaten breakfast yet, it's a good way. Learn the daf first, right? And then you can eat, because one could maybe even replace the other. Okay, not that I recommend it. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shnehem mikra chad darshu. They actually both learn it from the same verses. Katuv echad omer, atzeret la'Hashem Elokecha. V'katuv echad omer, atzeret tiyeh lachem. Each time the atzeret is referring to a different holiday, but atzeret la'Hashem Elokecha and atzeret tiyeh lachem. So one place it says the holiday is for God, and the other place it says the holiday is for you. So now it's going to depend. Each one's going to read it with their, with their glasses, with what they see. Rabbi Eliezer savar o kulo l'Hashem, o kulo lachem. Either that or that. Either it's for Hashem or it's for you. There's a debate, by the way, about whether he means it has to be either or do you have three options? Either kulo l'Hashem, sit and learn all day, or sit and eat all day, or you can do both, right? It's not clear. Or does he say it's either or? Okay, big debate. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, split it 50-50. You have to eat, right? Eating is part of the mitzvah, okay? V'chetzio la'Hashem, and so is learning. Amar Rabbi Elazar, hakol modim ba'atzeret tebi'ina. So now comes in Rabbi Elazar the Amora. This was a machloket Tanaim. Comes Rabbi Elazar and he says, there's a few, okay, he's going to say, and some others are going to say, there's three exceptions to this rule. Hakol modim ba'atzeret. Everyone agrees on Shavuot. Tebi'ina nami lachem. You find out two interesting things about Shavuot. Have to eat on Shavuot. Can't not eat on Shavuot. My time, this would be, right, what would be the nafkamina here? Can you fast? What if you want to fast on these days? Are you allowed? And maybe you're not allowed because you have to eat. So everyone agrees on Shavuot, you have to eat. My time, Yom Shenitna Bo Torah, it's the day the Torah was given. That makes it important. You have to eat. Amar Rabba, okay, now why, right? Well, the idea is, so some people say, right, you're supposed to be so happy the Torah was given, and how do we show happiness? We eat. Some people say after Matan Torah, it said by Yochlu v'yishtu. They sat and they ate after they got the Torah. So, and the Torah even tells us that. So they say, here you see, you have to have a seudah. I think there's some other reasons also. I don't remember. Amar Rabba, hakol modim b'Shabbat tebi'ina nami lachem. Everyone agrees when it comes to Shabbat, you also need lachem. My time v'karata l'Shabbat oneg, because it says you should call Shabbat oneg. Oneg means eating. Amar Rav Yosef, third exception, hakol modim b'Purim. Okay, this is interesting because Purim is only midrabanan, right? Mapidom, all of a sudden we're bringing Purim into the story here. Because until now we were talking about verses from the Torah about holidays. We were thinking of Yom Tov. But Purim also, and this was obvious, Debi'ina nami lachem, my time, yemei mishteh u'simcha k'tiveh. It says days of rejoicing, which, mishteh and simcha. Mishteh is obviously eating. Mar b'rei Ravina, kula shata avayati b'ta'anita. He would fast every day, even on the holidays. Levad me'atzarta u'puria u'mala yom kippur, except for 3 days. Shavuot, Purim, and Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur we didn't see, now we're going to see it. Atzeret, Yom Shenitna Bo Torah, as we said, Torah was given. Puria Yemei Mishteh U'Simcha K'tiv. Male Yom Kippurei Detanich Barav Midifti V'In Temet Nafshotechem B'Tisha Alachodesh. Very strange pasuk. It talks, even though it's talking about the 10th of the month of Yom Kippur, it talks about you should torture yourself also, or make yourself suffer on the 9th. Me'erev ad erev, it says, right, from the evening to the evening. So what's it talking about? It's not on the 9th. Right? That night is already the 10th. So what are we talking about? If you eat on the 9th, it's as if you fasted 2 days. There's a mitzvah to eat. There's some people who, right, it's been said, right, there's rabbis who say you have to keep something in your mouth all day long so that you're eating all day long. right? That's a bit of an extreme position, but the idea is that you should make sure to eat on that day. Different reasons given for that. We're going to move on though. Rav Yosef, b'yom ha'atzar ta'amal, avdali igla tilti. He would have an egel meshuleshet, okay, which there's a bunch of different interpretations, comes up many times. It's basically a very great piece of meat, okay, whether it means one that's third to its mother or there's different explanations, but we'll leave that aside. He said, make me a bit, okay, first thing to notice, Shavuot, he's not eating dairy, he's eating meat. And some people say, based on this, you have to eat meat on Shavuot. I don't know if you know this, there's different, right? We all have this minhag to eat dairy, but there are many people who actually eat meat. Some people eat dairy and then meat. Some people, right, there's all different minhagim about this, but here you see a source that people quote la halacha, that you have to eat meat on Shavuot. And he said, Amar li, it's a great line, Hi Yoma de Kagarim, Elo HaYom, if it weren't for this day, de Kagarim, if it weren't the Torah, I hadn't received the Torah, or we hadn't received the Torah, then Kama Yosef Ika B'Shuka, I would just be like every other Yosef in the Shuk. The Torah has made me who I am. It goes back to the, right, it's like, we're going to see right now this other big line, okay, and we're going to end with it. Rav Sheshek Kol Taltzin Yom Mahadro Le Talmude, Hebrew review his Torah every 30 days, Vitali V'kai B'Ivrit Didasha, and then he would stand by the bolt of the door. Ba'amal, Chaden Avshai, my rejoice, my soul. Lach Kai, Lach Tanai. It's for you that I've been learning all this, okay, for my soul. To which the Gemara says, okay, very interesting line. You'll see why very relevant to today. V'ha'amar Rabbi Elazar, im malei Torah lo nitkaimu shamayim va'aretz. What do you mean? Were it not for the Torah, the shamayim and aretz you're not learning Torah for your own sake. You're learning Torah for kiyum shamayim va'aretz, to keep the world going. Shne'amal im lo briti yomam v'layla chukot shamayim va'aretz lo samti. If it weren't for my brit, my Torah that I made a covenant with you, I wouldn't have created the world, right? I never would have done this. So basically, our learning sustains the world. Why is this so relevant? Because this is in Israel now, there's this big issue with the Haredim wanting to open their schools, right? Or opening their schools and claiming that we have to learn, because learning is what's keeping the Shamayim Va'aretz. They're quoting this verse in their claims, right? They're taking it to say our schools have to be open, even though there's closure and no other schools are open in the country. And it's a big deal. They're using this from our Gemara. So very relevant. So they say, Me'ikara ki avid in. So how did he say, I'm doing this for myself? Right. And obviously, yes, as Tova was saying, we can learn at home. We'll get to that. So Me'ikara ki avid in shadate dinafshe ka'avid. So he says, why did he say, rejoice my soul, even though what he's really doing is for the whole world? So it's because when you start, you do it, Me'ikara, the original reason you do it is for yourself. Okay. Why do you learn? You learn for yourself. Now, you can read this in two ways, and I want to end with this nice idea. What does it mean? It means that you're learning for yourself, but ultimately, it's like mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, right? That even though you're not doing it for the right reason, ultimately you will come to it. So you might be doing it for your own sake, but ultimately it will help sustain the world, and you will do it for that reason. Another possibility, and this I think is really interesting, is that to read it as, no, you're doing it for yourself. Learning is for your own sake. The fact that it has this effect on the world is not right. That happens. It's an after effect. It's not that that's the reason why you're supposed to be doing it. And that's why he was saying, rejoice, right? I'm doing this for my own pleasure, which connects, by the way, with the whole idea of Simchat Yom Tov, right? How could you say Simchat Yom Tov is from learning? Because learning provides you with so much pleasure and so much satisfaction. And what I wanted to say is that, as Tova was saying that on the chat, that this doesn't have to do with learning in school, and right, there's ways to learn otherwise, and there's ways to learn, and the learning is to strengthen yourself. And once you strengthen yourself, right, that has this broader effect on people around you and the world around you, and helps to create kiyum shamayim va'aretz. So with that thought, you can think about what your learning does for you and how much it both provides you with personal satisfaction and communal and global effects on other things. So with that, we'll end. Happy Tu B'Shvat to everybody, and on that nice idea of the importance of Limud Torah.